Now with Israel's arsenal, it's not just the cluster bombs, it's the uranium-tipped shells, the flechettes they call them, which explode like cluster bombs of the Americans, but they throw out hundreds of thousands of sharp darts, and they've got other forms of weaponry like this, which hurl out razor discs. What has happened in Gaza is an experiment. They're putting into practice the latest weaponry. They're testing it out. The Palestinians are being used, treated as guinea pigs for the international arms industry, and thereby hangs a tale. So it's not just Israel, and it's not just us sitting here, people of Vancouver, British Columbia, or across this great land. It's not just to help the Palestinians, which is a moral duty anyway in terms of solidarity, but it's actually about the future of your own children and grandchildren. Because when the international arms industry, largely driven, as you well know, by the United States, with Canada very closely interlinked, with the Brits and the French and the Germans and the Chinese and the Russians and so on. But the development of an arsenal of weaponry, friends, that is not an arsenal of weaponry against ordinary soldiers with their battle armor and all their devices and ability to defend themselves. White phosphorus bombs are banned from use against military personnel. So that lady that Kaufman was referring to, like the other spokespersons, she was saying, they were caught out, they had to change tack, the IDF spokespersons, that we don't use anything that's not permitted. It was a lie, because white phosphorus can only be used to help your troops on the battlefield when they are cornered, and you need to put down a very thick cloud of smoke. It's not to be used against the attacking force who are attacking your personnel. It's for the smoke screen, because it is the most savage way of inflicting harm and death on people. Colin Green is one of the top surgeons in Britain who belongs to Physicians for Human Rights and links in with Israeli Physicians for Human Rights. I've had long discussion with him on my way here. He's a marvelous man, and incidentally pays tremendous tribute to those Jews within Israel and those such as the Israeli Physicians for Human Rights, amongst whom are Palestinian physicians within Israel itself, Mohammed. And he was telling me how people, the kids, women, whoever, they hit with the white phosphorus. And it's excruciating, but you think you've just been burnt on the surface. And initially, they sent people back home after applying some surface dressing, only to be called 2-3 days later by the family to say that that kid, that person is in the most dreadful agony, and the whole body is going black. Because what the phosphorus does is it melts through your body and gets right inside, and it will eat you up from inside. And he said to me, Ronnie, when the surgeons cut the body open and the oxygen, the air, gets to the white phosphorus that's inside, it suddenly flares up. And he's seen surgeons whose hands have been burnt, as well as, of course, the poor victim. Now, what manner of people will use this kind of weaponry against other human beings? And this is where I'm optimistic in the end about human being and human nature. But we've seen from apartheid and racism in South Africa how decent human beings can be so bombarded from birth through the whole socialization process in their homes and in their schools and in the military, that in the end they will dance when they hear about the hundreds who are perishing, which is what's been happening in Israel. If, like Mordecai, you get into the net and you link in with the Palestinian electronic intifada, with those Israelis who are constantly, Jack Halpin and all these other wonderful people, exposing what is going on. So your minister here, Jason Kenney, and their ilk, they are not helping Jewish people. They are actually operating in a detrimental way. And this is why I believe that Zionism is the worst enemy of the Jewish people. Like many of those who came before me and Mordecai, who perhaps we both had the privilege of at least learning a little bit about. I'm coming to the end now, so my voice seems to have at least lasted this long. And I just wanted to end, and I think I'll stand for this because it's 5 minutes, and I won't collapse for 5 minutes. So, but where does this all lead us? I've been emphasizing how important it is to understand this conflict and the problem and its causes and its threat to all of us in this world, and in a world that, with this economic meltdown, with the attacks on so many distant lands led by the coalition of the United States, Britain, or whoever, sucking in so many countries, that in a sense there's a world war taking place which is going to be visited back on all of us. So again, I want to reiterate that solidarity isn't just, it's not charity. Solidarity in the end is also about yourself and your worth as a human being. The South African experience through the anti-apartheid movement showed us the enormous extent of the role that solidarity played in many respects. The solidarity shows the people who are struggling, those in the prisons and so on, that the world is not ignoring them, that people stand with them. And of course the actions, the solidarity actions that we had, rather similar to what's just happened today in Malmo. Many occasions, I remember how New Zealand, not unlike Canada, Australia, right, those dominions, with the same type of background and history and mindset, not particularly revolutionary. And I saw a film the other day. It was a sports film, South Africa. We're a bit crazy about a weird game called rugby. Canadians are trying to learn it a bit, not too but it showed the history of the South Africans, the Springbok players throughout like 100 years. And there was the sequence of them in New Zealand, 1966. And everywhere they went, the red carpet was rolled out. They were being feted like absolute royalty. And it's a small country, with small towns. And everywhere they stopped, whether in their buses or in the trains, the whole house, Uncle Tom Cobley and all, were there to greet them and cheer them. Virtually 12 years later, there was the next tour of New Zealand, and the South African rugby players had no place to hide. They were running for not dear life, it wasn't violent, but in terms of the mobilization, it had totally changed the New Zealand mindset. People came to those matches, and there was quite a lot of partisanship, because there will be rugby players, and there will be academics, and there will be trade ministers who will tell you, don't mix sport and academia and trade with politics. We are undermining ourselves. And I'll tell you that. So there are a lot of people getting rather heated because of this growing number of the New Zealand populace that would have nothing of it and stopped that tour in its tracks. Now, that was something like 12, 15 years, I can't remember exactly. The anti-apartheid movement started off in 1959 in Britain out of a boycott in South Africa. The ANC in South Africa called for an internal boycott against our potato farmers who were receiving black labour out of the prisons. And many of the people, unfortunates, who were having to work as slave labour on their farms, never saw the next day and were buried with the potatoes there. And this came to light. So we called the internal boycott against potato products, fish and chips and crisps and things like that. And then we had that idea, the leaders had this idea of going abroad, Britain being the main trading partner, and set up the anti-apartheid movement with the boycott issue. And it took 30 years before it was at its height. It wasn't easy. Those of us who did solidarity work as well as our clandestine activities somehow elsewhere, but when we were in London, we would be sent around Britain. And I can remember so many occasions. There's nothing as bad as the English weather. It's the foulest going because it's always cold and wet through. So you get on your train and you go up to Manchester or Edinburgh or whatever, and someone would meet you at the station and you'd trudge around for several miles to come to some godforsaken place, and there would be 12 people waiting for you. We never ever showed any disappointment. We never showed it, you don't show the disappointment. And you develop a mindset. I mean, even if there were 3 or 4, that okay, don't know what happened with the way you guys organised, but forget that. Let's go and sit down at the pub or somewhere, since there's just half a dozen of us, and let's chat this through over a beer or two. So it's very hard work, and it's uphill slog, but it's very rewarding, and you get the critical mass being built up, which we had right across the board in terms of the academic, the sporting, the cultural, the trade, and so on. The orange, outspan orange, or Cape grapes, were ideal as clear-cut symbols of apartheid. And this is the aspect of strategizing. There were very significant turning points. The sporting one, exactly like what's happened at Malmö, turning points. Kodak workers in the States forced the divestment of Kodak from from South Africa. And very late in the day, but it was very significant, anti-apartheid people started buying shares in Barclays Bank and going to the shareholders meeting and then attacking the policy. Barclays Bank pulled out. They never said it was for that reason. It wasn't politics, but just looking at the business aspect, I think it's time for us to go and invest somewhere else. But I really want to encourage everybody to build this movement here in Canada on the scale that you Canadians helped build the anti-apartheid movement, and will network and link right across the world. Now, it wasn't the boycott on its own that led to the demise of apartheid. Otherwise, we'd tell all the Palestinians, come out from home and help us build the boycott. It's an integrated struggle and a multi-pronged strategy. And for what it's worth, in our situation, we had what we call 4 pillars of struggle. And we always discuss this. The Palestinians are very keen, and even Hamas, by the way, has wanted to know from us, how did we get the change in South Africa? But the 4 pillars of struggle were essentially for us, the leading one was the organisation of our people, mass political struggle, reinforced by underground struggle, people who were getting the leaflets out and radio broadcasts and plugging into the unions and the youth and the women and the faith groups, giving them guidance, and armed action. And with the armed action, we endeavoured as far as possible not to attack, indiscriminate attacks on civilians. And then, 4th, key to this is the international solidarity movement. The Vietnamese had similar approach. In fact, we learned a lot from them. With the Vietnamese, given that they had liberated territory in North Vietnam, for them the primary aspect was the military, because we had certain weaknesses in that regard, including our terrain. We correctly, and I would say it should be the case unless you're actually at war, as was the case with the Vietnamese, that the focus on the mass political struggles, when you have 150,000 Palestinians living within Israel in the north, in the Galilee, demonstrating, marching in the streets against the butchery in Gaza. And this is that people who had hung on from 48, when 150,000 of them, and mainly young people, just like the young people, Mordechai's generation here, Muhammad's generation. But Mordechai and myself, we still
we're youngsters.
The emergence of the youth of Palestine is very, very significant. They are incredibly impressive, the men and women, the young people. And when you see this demonstration on that scale within Israel, when you see with that 500 Jews marching with those people, when you see women in Toronto, Jewish women, staging a sit-in in the Israeli mission, when you see what's happened in the tennis match today, when you see the dock workers of Durban refusing to offload cargo, Israeli cargo, from a ship flying a flag of convenience, then, Mordechai, you've said it. It's a cusp, it's a turning point. We're getting to the stage now where a huge movement is taking shape internationally and is going to be of incalculable support to the Palestinian people in their just, legitimate cause. And it is a cause that's going to help to liberate, as the liberation of South Africa liberated both black and white. It's a cause that will liberate Muslim, Christian and Jew in Palestine, Israel. So please carry on. Thank you.